Hi, my name is Miss Bina Baker, and I'll be teaching the first lesson in my series of lessons based on the CXC syllabus for biology. Now, we will be discussing the topic variety of life. The major discussion would or will be on classification. Now, just as a disclaimer, all the references are taken from Biological Science 1 and 2 third edition, along with pictures from the internet, which are all embedded in this PowerPoint that we are now going to review. So, when we think of variety of life, we think of different organisms, and when we think of classification, we think of grouping. But an important question here is, why do we actually classify? So there are two main points I have outlined in this lesson. So one, to learn about different organisms from others in its group. So for example, if one organism has features similar to another unknown organism, we can say that it is of the same ancestral background, or it will, if we test it, it will produce similar DNA results among other type of procedures that we would do in science. We also classify in order to describe organisms in a common language in the science community. So for example, we have a science in Jamaica and one in the UK. So in order for them to communicate on a research they're doing about an organism, they need to refer to them as the using similar terms, recognizing that different cultures has different aspects to it. We will benefit from classification by using similar terms. It will make life much easier when we're describing. Now, we are going to define the term classification. So this is the science of grouping organisms together, as we said at the beginning, on the basis of physical features that they have in common or by genetics. So, as we may know, some of us may or may not know, if we are grouping them according to genetics, they are going to eventually display the phenotypes, which will reflect as a physical feature. So everything here ties in together. And also, we must note that physical features may include size, color, number of limbs, among other things, which we can definitely describe. So just to note, there is no perfect system of classification, and as new discoveries are made in science, changes are inevitable. So as the years go by, more research is done. Scientists may very well add different animals to the different file, or take animals from this file or group and add it to the other. So science is always changing, so we must bear that in mind. Alright, so as we continue, if you have not yet known about the term taxonomy, We will learn that today. And a taxonomy is a scheme of classification, or you would say like a guideline for classification. We have two branches of taxonomy in science. So one would be naming of organisms, which we refer to as nomenclature, and we have the other one, placing organisms into groups, which is the systemics, and this is what we are really going to focus on in this lesson. The systemics, or the systematic, sorry, branches is based on the binomial system pioneered by Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus between 1707 and 1778. And of course, you can do more reading on that to see how that came about. But the important thing to know is that we classify based on Carl Linnaeus's binomial system. Right. So that was just an introductory lesson on classification, why we classify. Now we are gonna go a bit more in depth. So we have part one here, where we're going to discuss the hierarchy of taxonomic groups and also the characteristics of the kingdoms, after which we would have, let's see, a single quiz question, or a single question that will help us tie things together, help us get us thinking. Alright, so we have here with us a diagram of the hierarchy of taxonomic groups, and if you are able to see clearly this diagram, you will realize that the grouping begins at domain, then goes on to kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, subspecies. But bear in mind, our classification system really starts at kingdom. Domain is higher than kingdom, but we will start at kingdom, and also the end point would be species, although we do have subspecies. Right? So if we further examine the diagram, we see here where you have a wide group of animals in the domain, and then the number of animals lessen as you become specific. So as you go into kingdom animalia, you're more specific. So we took out the flowering plants, and then once you go to the phylum, took out the beetle. When you go to the class mammalia, you're taking out another organism, and so on and so forth. Family, chordata, you have the genus and the species, and the subspecies you only leave a dog. So in descending order of the hierarchy of taxonomic groups, you become more specific in descending orders. Alright, now so we have a very good example here. Us being human, we are from the kingdom Animalia, and the phylum we belong to is the Chordata. We also are from the Mammalia group. Our order is primates, family Hominidae. We have the genus Homo and species Sapien. And just to bear in mind, the genus and the species, whenever we are writing that, they can be italized. And one of our first mnemonics we have here that can help you to actually remember the different levels in order. We have kings, play chess on fine green squares. So kings play chess on fine green squares, right? So as we look at that, we also have another example. So as we said, the genus and the species, they can be italicized or they can also be underlined. So whenever you're writing these um, genus and species levels of the hierarchy should always either be underlined or italicized. And we have here as well an example of a brown bear. The only difference really is the order that they are from compared to humans. They are from the carnivora order. So that's the only difference basically. And we have a mnemonics here as well. Mnemonic number 2. It says King Philip come over for grape soda. So that's pretty easy to remember. You know, the more you say it, the more you remember, and will be able to apply yourself in exams when that question comes across, which is the second level, the third, fourth, fifth, etc. Alright, so we have here another diagram that describes the relationship between domain and kingdom. So as we said before, we're not really focusing on domains, but domains are very important because the domain encompass everything basically, all organisms. So we have three domains. We have the bacteria, the archaea, eukarya, right? And then these are broken down into the kingdoms. So the eukarya have plants, animals, fungi, protists, and they also have eubacteria and archaebacteria. Now, one important point to note is that the bacteria and the archaea, they are part of the wider or the more general pro, 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 prokaryotic, prokaryotic domain. They can be or kingdom, the prokaryotic kingdom. They are part of that and can also further be compared to a more recent terminology for kingdom of Monera, the Monera kingdom, which we will also see as a prokaryotic kingdom. So the eubacteria and the archaeobacteria, they are a part of the Monera or prokaryotic kingdom. This is one. So in total you will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kingdoms and still have 3 domains. Alright, so next, another lovely picture here, our diagram of the different characteristics. Alright, so if we look more closely here, start at the bottom, you have the Monera kingdom, which we just discussed, that includes eubacteria and archaeobacteria, and they are prokaryotic. So that is the kingdom that they are part of, the prokaryotic or Monera kingdom, meaning that their chromosomes are not encapsulated in they don't have any encapsule to encompass their chromosome. So they are new unicellular, absorb or photosynthesize. They are mobile or non-mobile, so they can either move or not move, and they produce asexually. We have the protist kingdom, which is eukaryotic. It is also unicellular as well as the Monera kingdom. However, you do have protists that are actually made up of multiple cells. They absorb, ingest, or photosynthesize, and they can actually produce sexually as well as asexually. Now, as we look at the upper part of this group diagram with the other three groups, we will realize that all of these three groups, along with the protists, they are eukaryotic. That means they have their chromosome encompassed with nuclear envelope, and they are all multicellular as well. The plants kingdom, however, they are the only ones that actually photosynthesize between the three. They are non-mobile as well as the fungi group, and all of them actually produce sexually. The animal kingdom organisms actually mobile, while the fungi and the plant kingdom organisms, they are not mobile. So they have really distinctive features that helps us to identify them, which is what classification is definitely about. So as we move on to the next slide, here we have some representational pictures here of what we have been discussing. So you see how different the archaea is compared to the bacteria, and later on in other lessons we'll definitely talk about bacteria and how it is made up and it's made up, its characteristics. So we already said it's prokaryotic, very important to always remember. In this group, the Monera group, which includes these two mainly, they are including bacteria and blue-green algae, produce asexually, and chromosomes are not organized in nucleus. We said that before. We also have the Protista kingdom, example the amoeba and the paramecium. Have there, look at the pictures here. The top, the larger picture would be the paramecium. So in general, all of these, or some of them, contain chloroplast to produce food. The chloroplast, as we would know or we may know, contains chlorophyll, which is responsible for trapping light to help plants like organisms produce food. So some absorb and digest food, and like the amoeba, they move by flowing their flagellum, others by their cytoplasm or their cilia, and they have the ability to produce sexually and asexually. So those are two examples. We move on to the fungi kingdom, which some are microscopic and some are macroscopic. They cannot produce their own food. So unlike the organisms of the plant kingdom, they don't have that ability. They also have to feed, just like humans, and we're going to talk about that, or just like organisms of the animal kingdoms or animal kingdom. So most fungi are saprotrophs, meaning that they actually produce enzymes that break down their food so that they can actually get the nutrients, and fungi reproduce sexually as well. Alright. Alright, so we are now at the plant kingdom, one of the largest kingdoms here of the five. Right, if you look closely here, you'll see the points. So first point, always remember, they are multicellular organisms. Their cells contain cellulose, which is responsible for them being strong and sturdy. They produce food using the process of photosynthesis, and as we said before, they contain chloroplast, which has green pigment. Chlorophyll absorb the light and kickstarts, so to speak, the process of photosynthesis. They are also categorized as flowering and non-flowering plants. We have examples here. So we have example of one flowering plant, which would be the hibiscus, um, and you also have flowering plants being subdivided into monocotyledons and dicotyledons. That's for another lesson. And we also have non-flowering plants, including ferns. This is a fern example of a fern. You have mosses at the bottom, and conifers here, example like pine cones and so forth. So these don't produce flowers at all. Alright, so hope we're understanding as we go along, and the information definitely be sticking with us. Alright, so we are actually at the end of part 1 of our lesson on classification. Now we have a brief or one quiz question, really simple and easy. Which of the following features is used to classify a group of organisms as class Insecta? Okay, so the first thing, we have not yet discussed that, but the mere fact that it says class Insecta, and these terms used, they are usually Latin, really easy to convert into English, where we know this is actually talking about the insect class. So it's basically asking which out of A, B, C, or D, which one of these features would be used to actually group them. Now we can use a process of elimination if we don't really know the answer, we never studied before, we never went through the topic. So one would think size, but size is not really used to categorize them, nor is shape really, although a lot of insects in the insect class, or a lot of organisms in the insect class, have a lot of different shapes. Color, definitely not really. So once we eliminate A, B, and C, we will know that number D is the most viable. So number of segments, because if we use our observation, we will realize a number of organisms that appear to be insects, they are segmented, they have external appendages that we're able to identify them by. So that would be the answer. Alright, so part 2 here. So in part 2 we are going to talk about the subdivisions of the Animalia kingdom, and also talk about classification key, which would be or will be very instrumental in assisting us to know how to classify when we have unknown organisms that we want to identify. Right. So we have a flow chart here of the animal kingdom, very colorful. Here you can see, let's just blow that up. you can see from this flow chart, we have the animal kingdom. So different levels of the animal kingdom in the hierarchy. So we can talk about phyla, subphyla, and classes. Now, if you look closely, I'm going to allow you to take a closer look, starting from the left side of the screen. You will see that we have the Annelida, Limatoda, Arthropoda, Platyhelminthes, Cardata, Porifera. We also have the Echemodermata, Cnidaria, and the Molluscs. So all of these are actually phylus, and they are actually the second level of the hierarchy of taxonomy for classification. Just to bring to your attention, we are not going to focus on the Porifera or the Platyhelminthes phyla groups. We are going to focus on the other 7 or 6 groups of the phyla. As we can see here as well, we go back to the left, the Arthropoda group, it's divided into a subphyla, which you have crustacean, labitae, chelicerates, as well. And then further on, you have invertebrate classes, which is the third level of classification. They may include insects, centipedes, millipedes, and the other phyla, they are also broken down into the invertebrate class as well. So we have the Echemodermata group with starfish, sea urchin. You have the Cnidaria group with jellyfish, coral, and also the molluscs, which includes oysters, clams, squids, octopus, etc. So those are actually the invertebrate classes overall on that level. Now you have the vertebrate class, which stems from the Chordata, and as we go down on the diagram, we will see that we basically have 5 classes of vertebrates. So we have amphibians, reptiles, we have birds and mammals and fishes, different type of fishes. So that's what we are working with. So we have just described the second and third level of the hierarchy under the animal kingdom, as invertebrates and vertebrates. Yes. Alright, so on to the next slide. So just a few pointers here to help us remember what we just spoke about. So animals are classified based on their characteristics. They are multicellular, made up of many cells, and they are heterotrophic, which means they seek food. So, for example, unlike the organisms of the fungi group, they actually produce enzymes to break down their food, and we actually seek our food as well, but in a different way. We digest the food in a different way. So we are also, as a part of the animal kingdom, mobile, except in certain life stages, and we will see which organisms are made up like that briefly. Um, we digest our food in internal chambers, which is what differentiates us from the organisms of other plant kingdoms. We have our organisms of the animal kingdom have internal skeleton, which consists of a vertebrae, also referred to as a backbone. So that's where we get the classes from. So we divide them into vertebrates and invertebrates. All right. So we also have the phyla chordata, which is divided into the vertebrate classes, and also vertebrate classes are classified into 5 groups. So we have invertebrates. They do not have backbones at all, and just to note here as well, so that you don't get confused based on the diagram that we actually, the flowchart we just looked at, is that the arthropoda phyla is actually subdivided, which then branches off into their invertebrate classes. So it is the only phyla that of the invertebrate class that actually branches off into a subphyla. So that's very interesting to note. Next slide. No, so we're getting more in depth. So if we look on our left, so this up, we're talking about phyla of the invertebrates first of all. So we have a picture here of a leech. So this is an example of the Annelida phyla, and the characteristics: long segmented body is covered with thin cuticle, can live on land and in water, and has an opening at both ends of the body. If you look at the picture, you will clearly see those characteristics, easy to identify. If we move to the page, we will also see the next phyla, the Limatoda, which example will be roundworm or Enoplea. Those are examples. So they can live on land and water as well, and has elongated bodies. So in comparison to the Annelida phyla, they actually have elongated bodies, while the Annelida have long segmented bodies. So that's something you can use to distinguish them. The Limatoda phyla may be microscopic, and they reproduce sexually as well. Alright, so next slide. So we have some beautiful pictures here of other phyla of invertebrates. So we pick up with the arthropoda group. We have a butterfly there. One example of a butterfly. So generally, this group, it includes insects, spiders, centipedes, and crustaceans such as crab. They have respiratory organs, such as gills or tracheal system. So as humans, for example, and larger mammals like bear have tracheal system. So some of them also have gills that they breathe with, or that they obtain oxygen through. Sorry. They have jointed appendages and also exoskeleton, hardened and is made of uh, chitin. So we move on to another example, chemoderms. So we have a starfish here, which another name for it would be the asterias. That's a group within itself of the chemoderms. Um, so as we can see here, it has five-fold symmetry, body is unsegmented without a head, two feet, which helps in locomotion. So moving about in its habitat, fertilization is actually external, and their sense organs are poorly developed and include tentacle organs. So unlike humans or larger organisms, um, this is why it says that it has poorly developed sense organs. So it doesn't have, or for example, our skin where it can sense touch easily and so forth. They have to be working with their tentacle organs. Alright, so we also have the Cnidaria phyla, which include coral. Of course, as visible, bodies are soft and to touch. They have stinging tentacles. Have to be very careful with these type of organisms. They are aquatic, of course, live in the water, capable of sexual reproduction, and they are all carnivores, so they also consume flesh. Right? So, next slide. Next slide. Alright, so we have phyla of invertebrates, the last one under the phyla of invertebrates. So these include snails, octopus, squids, oysters, clams. You can see also slug there. You see a slug there at the top. Really good representational pictures of what we're talking about. You have the oyster here, you have the squid there. They can produce pearls, that's the oyster, those with shells. Many have calcified shells, so the shell is calcified, that's a characteristic you can easily identify, and they are found on land and in the depths of the sea. They have hand or muscular foot and visceral hump present. So, for example, the squid has this, we would describe this as a visceral hump per se, as an example to identify. And fertilization can be external or internal, whichever one. Right, so we're coming down nicely. The next slide now, we are going to begin to talk about the five classes of vertebrates. We are going to start with mammals. So, and we should really pay keen attention to these. Very important to know. So for mammals, so the main characteristics, one of the main characteristics, that they birth fully formed young and produce milk for feeding these young. And also another characteristics or feature would be they are most of them are covered with fur, and they mostly live on land except for maybe the dolphin. You can see nice picture there. You see an elephant, example of an elephant and dolphin there. And also we are gonna go over to describing the fish class. So they obtain air through gills. So they don't have tracheal system. They live in water all their lives. They are covered with flaky overlapping scale. So that's a main point. So main characteristics of the fish class: they're covered with flaky overlapping scales. Their fins help to coordinate movement, so they don't have limbs like larger organisms like humans and so forth. Fish reproduce sexually, but their eggs are actually fertilized externally. Alright, so moving on to the right of our slide, we have amphibians. So these organisms, they have two life phases: first part in water and the second part on land. So like toads and frogs, those are two really good examples that really come to your mind whenever you think about that two life phases. You also have, some of them have gills during their larval stage, while as adults lungs would deliver. Yes. All right, so they also have smooth skin, smooth and moist skin. Very important to note again, their skins are smooth and moist. And we're gonna, when we talk about the other two classes, we're gonna compare. So they lay soft jelly-like eggs that are fertilized externally. So like the fish, their eggs are fertilized externally. The only difference with the fish is that the fish actually produce sexually. Alright, so they have the ability to control their internal body temperature. Very important as well. Alright, so we're gonna move on to the next slide now. Alright, so we have our last two class of vertebrates here. We have the birds. So the bodies are covered with feathers. They have 4 limbs, with the 4 limbs forming wings. So that's the front part of their limbs. They form the wing structure. And they have the ability to control their own body temperature. So like the amphibian, they are able to control their body temperature. Their upper and lower jaw extend to form beaks, so very important to note as well. And they lay hard shelled eggs. So in comparison to the amphibians, whose eggs are soft and jelly-like, the birds, their eggs are hard shelled eggs. Alright, so finally we have on the right of the page reptiles. So you can see here, for example, crocodile, turtle, have lizard. They have dry scaly skin. So in comparison with the birds, which have feathers, and in comparison with the amphibians, they have dry scaly skins. They lay tough leathery eggs. So while they lay tough leathery eggs, you have birds, so while they lay tough leathery eggs, you have birds with hard shell eggs and amphibians with soft jelly eggs. and they are only able to control their internal body temperature by being in the sun, and eggs are fertilized internally, and except for snakes, their limbs, they have four limbs. So this was an arrow. So except for snakes, they have four limbs as well as the birds. Yeah, so basically that's all the classes of vertebrates that we actually discussed. So to wrap things up, we are going to look at the classification key. So this is the classification key, an example of it. So the classification key is a series of questions about an organism's physical characteristics where the answer will branch off to another question or will identify the unknown organism. So for example, you will ask, you have an organism, you go on a nature walk, you are doing research, then you will ask yourself, you don't know what the organism is, you would ask yourself, does it have hair on the body? So if the answer to that is yes, then you can say this is a mammal. If it's no, you go on to ask second question, does it have feathers? Yes, then that simply means it's actually a bird. If it's a no again, you then ask, is the skin moist? And because we know that amphibians have moist skin, we will know that would be the answer. But if that's not the answer and it's a no, their skin is not moist, you also question, does it have dry scales? If so, then we can identify that that would be a reptile. And then if it is neither one of the four that questions or the four categories that we just discussed, then we will of course know by elimination that this will definitely be a fish. So using the classification key, really simple and easy. You have different representation of the key on the internet. You can go ahead and look into that or research. All right, so we also have to wrap up. Just a final question here, really quick question. So we have this source here from cxcbiologytutorteachable.com. Took that from that site. All right, so this question is asking, let me zoom it in. Alright, so classification of organisms, grouping according to similarities. So identify two features of the organisms observed in figure 3 which could be used to classify them. So when you look at these organisms, the first thing we would do is use what we learned in regards to the different classes of animals. What are their characteristics? So if I were the one answering this question in the examination, I would right away know that organism 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 would be related to the arthropods phyla. They would be a part of the phyla of arthropods or arthropoda. And organism 3, which appears to be a slug, will be a part of the mollusca phyla. And if we were going to say give two features, we could say like organism 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, they would have jointed appendages, exoskeleton hardened and made of chitin, or we could say they have slug-like bodies. That would be in particular for organism 3, and have a hard shell. So if you have the characteristics at the forefront of your mind, it's really easy to identify two features of the organisms observed here to get your full marks for this question. So here ends our presentation. I really hope that everyone learned a lot, and remember